Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us again today. I'm Pastor Steve Green. This is Keystone Church. My wife Penny and I pastor here. And this message is for Sunday, November 16th. For some time, we've been talking about what is faith, wanting to get a clear picture of what faith is, what faith does. And now part of that is now for several weeks, we've been talking about the true face of submission. And frankly, I've loved this because submission really gets a bad rap. It really, on the surface, it looks bad. This looks like something I don't want to do that. If I can get away without doing that, I would prefer not to do that. And yet, submission and the role that it plays in God's world is marvelous. And sometimes we don't see the true face of it. The true face of submission is that we win. The true face of submission is that we're exalted by God. The true face of submission is that we love life and see good days. It's not a subject that we do well to avoid because of fear of misconceptions, but it's a subject we need to embrace because it is a means by which, and I want to say this, it's not just a means, it is, in a big way, it is the means by which we enter into God's fullness, the fullness of God's plan for our life. And so that's what we've been talking about. And a week ago, I thought that I would move on to a different subject last week. And then as I prayed about it, it became apparent to me, no, we're still on that subject, not just what is faith, but the true face of submission. And so last week we had the true face of submission, Roman numeral 4. And this week we have the true face of submission, Roman numeral 5. And even when I was endeavoring to move on to something else, in fact, what's happening is it's expanding on me. And today's message, in I, I really enjoyed last week's message, and I got more than the normal amount of good feedback on it, and I was glad for that, and I thought it was a good message too, and so, but I was ready to move on this week, but again, the Holy Spirit is prompting me really to double down on this. And so this week's message is going to be similar to last week's, and perhaps even going into more depth. We'll see. When I wrote the outline, I wanted to go further, move on to other things, but we'll see how it goes. So we're talking today about the true face of submission. And we read in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 23, who when he was reviled, did not revile in return, speaking of Jesus when he was crucified. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. And that last phrase, but committed himself to him who judges righteously, is the core of our message today. Now, it's at the beginning, it's going to sound like we're going off in a different direction, but as we explained last week, this supposed different direction is really a key to what our main message is, and that's the subject. What I want to start with is the subject of boundaries. So we'll move more quickly through it this week than we did last week. Four simple key thoughts to the subject of boundaries, New Testament subject of boundaries. Number one, my life, the life on my side of the boundary line. So we're comparing relationships to the physical boundary between two properties. My life, the life on my side of the boundary line, belongs to Christ. And other people do not have the right to overstep that line and try to manage, control, or manipulate me because I've given my life to Christ. I've given my life to Christ. It belongs to him. We're looking at this. We can look at boundaries from a natural standpoint, and there's some value to that, but much more value looking at it. It becomes tremendously more powerful when we look at it from a Bible perspective. So we've given our life to Christ. Other people do not have the right to overstep the boundary line, the line between me and them. They've got their side, I've got my side, and on my side, Christ is now ruling in my life. They do not have the right to overstep that line and try to manage, control, or manipulate me. And just as important, and perhaps even more important, because this is the part that we control, nor do I have the right to permit them. And so that might be the big issue. It isn't that other people are trying to control me at times. And when we say other people, we don't mean everybody and we don't mean all the time. It's just that this happens sometimes. Uh, but the issue is going to be, why do I permit it if it is happening? Because I don't have to permit it. So sometimes other people want things from us. They need things from us. They demand things from us. They will try to manipulate us. They will be mad if we do not do what they want. They will be hurt if we do not do what they want. They might no longer be our friend if we do not do what they want, and they may claim that we or they will suffer some terrible outcome if we do not do what they want. And so the simple, and in the concept of this is so simple, the practice of it is more difficult. But the concept is this: the simple and necessary answer is often no. Just that very short word, 2-letter word, no. That doesn't mean we're not saying we ought to be unkind or abrupt or impatient with people. There's no doubt a courteous way of communicating and connecting and engaging with people. And often the necessary answer is no. We do not have the right to give away what we've already given to Jesus. Now, we do have a responsibility. Sometimes a person might hear what we said so far and think, okay, you're just building walls between you and people. These big walls you're building here. There's dividing lines, there's boundary lines, there's what's theirs, what's ours, and we're just building walls. But that is so clearly not the case, because what exists on our side of the line is the responsibility to love people. So that would mean there are not walls. That means we're reaching out, we're caring, we're helping, we're blessing, we're forgiving, we're doing the relational things that are necessary for good relationships. We have that responsibility to love people, but that is on our side of the line. We do not have the right to allow other people to trespass over onto our side and start to manage our life for us, tell us what to do. We do, I mean, we could go into more detail. It might be hard to tell, but I'm trying to move along here. So the second thought is just the other side of that same coin. Is if I do not have the right to permit people, if they don't have the right to trespass on my side, then obviously I don't have the right to trespass on theirs. That would be obvious. I can't. There's nothing in it, and the whole human motivation for wanting to control other people is just false. There is no real reason. It's just a carnal, empty, pointless, destructive thing for everybody concerned. So I do not have the right to do that. The third key thought is that since Christ is now in control of my life, again, we're looking at this from a biblical standpoint, and I say theoretically in control because that's a process. We're learning to let Him have complete control. But since Christ is now in control of my life and I am working together with Him, so my life now is in His hands, and He and I are working collaboratively together on it. I do not have the right to blame others for what goes wrong in my life because it's my life. It's not theirs. They're not controlling, they're not managing, they're not manipulating. It's my life. Therefore, I do not have the right to blame others. Now, other people are going to be doing wrong things and at times, and those wrong things will impact us and affect us in various ways at times. But that does not control, the outcome of my life. And so it doesn't matter what other people do, whether it's good, bad, or in between. I do not have the right to blame them for my life. In fact, I have the responsibility to accept. Here, let me rephrase that. What I do is I take personal responsibility for it. It's between the Lord and I, and we're the ones that are working on this together, and it's not His fault. And therefore, I need to be willing at times to say, okay, there's something here that I did not do right. And so then, that being true, again, there's a flip side to that coin now. Therefore, I do not bear responsibility for the lives of other people. And this is part of the give and take of life and the hustle and bustle of life that we live in, is that people will sometimes try to blame us for what has happened in their life. And that's just not true. But again, that we're not being cold-hearted about this, saying, your life is not my responsibility. Uh, you know, like Cain, yeah, am I my brother's keeper? Um, the fact is we are not to blame for what happens in somebody else's life, but we do bear the responsibility to love them. Again, that falls to us. Amen. So this is a very simple thing. The concept here, the truth of it is just very, very simple. But the excitement begins when we get thrown into life and we get the chance to put it to practice. Now, we said this last week and again this week, leading into a passage in 1 Peter. Let's read it, chapter 2, verses 18 to 20. Servants, be submissive to your masters. And we're talking, our title today is The True Face of Submission. And so here we read, servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. So here in verse 18, God is stating what the righteous thing is, what our responsibility is, what the loving thing is, what falls to us. To submit to servants in those days. We're speaking of people that were in bondage to their masters. And he says, be submissive to them with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. For this is commendable if because of conscience toward God, one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. So we're talking now, enduring grief, suffering wrongfully. Verse 20, for what credit is it if when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? So things seem to be unraveling very, very quickly here. This seems to be a boundaries nightmare. This isn't boundaries. This is a nightmare. Let's finish the verse. But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. So we have now masters controlling the lives of their servants, which ideally, that is not boundaries, is one person controlling another person. That is not good boundaries. We have masters beating now their servants for their faults. That isn't good boundaries. We have masters beating servants who are not at fault at all. It's just getting worse with every word we read. And then we have God instructing servants to be submissive to all of this and to take it patiently. And so this might seem to be a terrible verse or passage to bring into play when we're talking about having a good sense of boundaries in our life. This may seem, again, like a boundaries nightmare. But the point we're making here is that it's difficult for us to grasp what Peter is saying here if we don't first have a good grip on boundaries. Boundaries will help us work our way through this and interpret what we're reading. So now let's continue with this passage in 1 Peter 2, verse 21. For to this you were called. Now it's our calling to do this, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example. That means that Jesus didn't just die for us on the cross, but in his death, he was setting an example for us to follow. That you should, he says in verse 21, that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin. This is talking about taking it patiently, enduring grief, suffering wrongfully. Jesus, in one sense, suffered wrongfully because he didn't do anything to deserve any of it. He committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who when he was reviled did not revile in return, and when he suffered he did not threaten. But this is what he did do, and this is the core thought in our message today, is he committed himself, he yielded himself, he surrendered himself to him who judges righteously. Now he was instructed by God to do this, and so it was the righteous thing. And so in doing the righteous thing, now, even though it appeared, and there's no doubt about this, I mean, being crucified, it appeared to be not the right thing to do. This is not a smart thing to do, especially if you don't have to do it. But in doing the right thing, now Jesus committed himself to him who judges righteously. And so he's trusting now in God and the fact that now that Jesus is doing the righteous thing, that God in fact will also do the righteous thing in judging this matter. Um, and so that is the basis of our life. It's the basis of how we do relationship with God. If God is not a righteous judge, then how do we commit ourselves to him? Um, it would be foolish to commit ourselves to him if he did not make righteous judgments. We got to be able to depend upon him. Jesus had to be able to depend upon his Father to make the righteous judgment in this case. And so this is a key Bible thought. We read several times where God identifies himself as the God who keeps covenant. He is not the God who breaks covenant. People sometimes break covenant, but God does not break covenant. We read in the Old Testament where there was a time when God was in covenant with people and they broke the covenant. And so God was no longer bound by that covenant. He didn't break it, they broke it, but because it's now broken, he was no longer bound by it. But again, it was people that broke it, not him. Uh, so he is the God who keeps covenant. He is the righteous judge. We can't commit ourselves to him because he judges righteously. This is the key, not only to these verses we're reading today. This is the key to our entire life, our entire relationship with God, is we can trust him. We read elsewhere, Numbers 23:19, God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. Has he said, and will he not do? Uh, God is putting this in the form of a question because he's wanting an answer from us, because he knows that as the human beings we're tempted at times to think that he has said and he will not do what he said. but the case obviously that God's making is he is a righteous judge. He does keep covenant, and he's not a man that he should lie. The verse continues, or has he spoken, and will he not make it good? And so this is what Jesus was trusting in when he committed himself. And so he committed himself by doing the righteous thing, and now he's in the hands of a God who judges righteously. Now, back to the servants here, we understand that God is not in control of this situation. He did not create this scenario where we have masters and servants. He did not create this scenario of masters beating their servants. These are all symptoms of a broken, a lost, a fallen world. But then the potentially confusing part would be when, in response to this broken, fallen, lost world, God then says to submit to it. Now it appears that he is a party to the whole thing. But here, and we'll see this so clearly, is he is not proposing that is a good thing for him now, God, to perpetuate the problems of the servants. But it is the more accurate viewpoint to understand that what he is doing now is he is not perpetuating the problem, he is saving them from the problem, which on the surface appears not to be true, but underlying the surface, it is in fact true. What he is saying is that God now operates through righteousness by faith. Righteousness, he operates in our life through our personal practice of righteousness by faith. And he wants them, the servants, to do the righteous thing, just like he asked Jesus to do the righteous thing. But in doing so, they now commit themselves by doing the righteous thing like Jesus did, who is our example. They now are committing themselves by faith to him who judges righteously. And therefore, God is now, we could say he's now permitted. We could also say he is committed to judging in their favor, because that's what God has said he would do, and he's not a man that he should lie. So then, reading ahead a little bit in 1 Peter chapter 3 now, and Peter clearly has not forgotten about this passage with the servants, because he's speaking in very similar terms here in chapter 3. And now he's not speaking to servants under masters, but now he's speaking to church people like you and I. Hopefully, we are not going to be the people in chapter 2. So I want us all to relax about that. We're not proposing that you and I be servants that are beaten by our masters. Hopefully that has nothing to do with our lives. But we are church people. And so he is saying here, he's continuing his line of thought, and he's speaking to church people. He says, finally, all of you be of one mind. This is chapter 3 and verse 8. Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another. Love as brothers, be tender-hearted, be courteous. That sounds all appropriate for Christians who are in fellowship, in communion, in community with one another. He says, but then he says, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling. That's exactly what he said Jesus did back in chapter 2 when he's talking about being an example for us. So we're still talking about that, the mind, the faith of chapter 2 in chapter 3 here. Not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing. So even though these things should never happen in church, they should never, never happen, not in 100 years, not once in 100 years, should you have evil done to you in church. Not once should it ever happen that you should have somebody that rails against you in church. But in the mind of Peter, apparently it happens sometimes. And so he's saying what to do in the face of it is not to return evil for evil or railing for railing, but on the contrary, a blessing. And then again, very similar language to chapter 2. He says, knowing that you were called to this. This is our calling. So although we may never be in the circumstance of chapter 2, nevertheless, chapter 2 is an example for us, just like Jesus on the cross is an example for us. He says that you should inherit a blessing. So the purpose of this, the purpose of submitting ourselves and not returning evil for evil or railing for railing, is that not that we would be used and abused, taken advantage of, trampled on, not that we would be a doormat for people, but because he says that you may inherit a blessing. And how does that work? It's because we're committing ourselves to him who judges righteously. We do the right thing, and God is now committed to judging righteously, which would be in our favor because we did the righteous thing. And so that's going to be to our advantage. So he's saying this is not to humiliate us, that we need to humble ourselves. This is to, in the language later in 1 Peter, this is to exalt us into his plan, his provision, his supply, his blessing on our lives. He says that you may inherit a blessing. And so one thing about this is it goes entirely opposite to human nature. And it goes entirely opposite to normal human thinking. People don't think this way. But God is saying he thinks this way. So he says that we may inherit a blessing. And then he describes what that blessing looks like, that we would love life and see good days. Is he talking about days on earth or days in heaven? Is he talking about if we do the right thing on earth, then we go to heaven? Or is he talking about days on earth? I think as we read, it becomes clear he's talking about days on earth. The blessing we have for righteousness is not reserved for heaven. There is a reward in heaven for righteous living on earth, but the reward is also active here while we're still on earth. That's an important thing for us to understand. He says, for he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil. So these things are all talking about righteousness, and not just the righteousness that is accounted to us by faith when we accept Jesus, the identity of righteousness, but very, very, let me see again, very clearly he's talking about the practice of righteousness that stems from that identity of righteousness. He says, let him refrain his tongue from evil, that's the practice of righteousness, and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. I mean, he couldn't be more explicit, could he? This is turn away from evil and do good. This is the practice of righteousness. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. And then in verse 13, and who is he who will harm you if you become followers of what is good? So clearly, this is not referring to heaven, because there's nobody in heaven up there waiting for us to get there who is waiting to jump out of a dark corner and harm us. That is just not going to happen in heaven. That's not what happens in heaven. And so he's talking about what happens on earth. And he's talking about the blessing we have, the protection we have, the care that we have from God here on earth. He says, who is he will harm you if you become followers of what is good? Verse 14, but even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed, and do not be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. So this is an ironclad commitment from God. And so that's the key issue is, again, committing ourselves to him who judges righteously. And the way that we do that is by trusting in God and by doing the righteous thing. And by doing the righteous thing, we're now committing ourselves to him and to his righteous judgment in our life. And so God is a God who keeps covenant. And he's not a man that should he lie, that he should lie. And as the question is asked in that verse, has he said it and will he not do it? There's just no way we can accuse God of being a liar. And so that means this is an ironclad commit from God. This is a covenant commitment that God has made to us. So now, going back to the servants back in chapter 2, who were being beaten by their masters, when they're being beaten by their masters, who is in control of this situation? God is not in control because he gave control on earth. He gave it to Adam, and Adam in turn committed high treason, gave it to the devil. The devil is now the god of this world. There's a lot of things that happen that are not the will of God now. God is not in control. If God was in control, none of this would be happening. The servant obviously is not in control because if they were in control, this would not be happening. They wouldn't be being beaten, and especially when they didn't even do anything wrong. So clearly it's the master who's in control of what's happening here. But now that the servant now does the righteous thing and takes it patiently, then now they are committing themselves to God who judges righteously as Jesus did. And now God is committed to judge righteously, which is to ensure that he does what he promised. And his promise is that anybody who does righteousness, that they will be blessed on this earth, that they will love life and see good days. It's the days and nights that happen here on earth. And that his eyes will be over them and that his ears will be open to their prayers. And that is his covenant promise. And it has to happen. And God is the one responsible for making it happen. And therefore, what we understand regarding the situation of the servants is that they were not in control, but the moment that they submitted to the unrighteous master and took it patiently, then at that point control of the situation transferred to them. And they're now in control. Not in control of the master. If they were in control of the master, then they would stop the beating. But they are in control of their destiny because they have done the righteous thing. And now God is going to ensure that one way or another, it might be multiple ways God knows how to do this, but one way or another, God is going to ensure that their life is blessed, that they love life and see good days, and that the eyes of the Lord are over them and his ears are open to their prayers. And now the servant is not in control of the master, but they are in control of their outcome. And so now the master is no longer in control of their outcome. He used to be, but now he's not. And that is God's point, is he wants to save us. And that is our clear understanding of what he's talking about in 1 Peter 2. Now, just a couple points about this is, and this is where we're not getting much further than we did last week, because I think we're actually going a little deeper than we did last week, is we read, for the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. And as is explained throughout the New Testament, and in fact earlier in this letter, the means by which we do righteousness, this type of righteousness, is by faith. And that's different. It's in fact opposite to doing righteousness by law. So a person can be doing righteousness and it not produce this desired effect. Sometimes people will say, well, I did the right thing, and nothing happened, or nothing improved. But it's like a cup of coffee. Let's use that as an example. Say what we're interested in. Say we like coffee. Coffee's fine. But and maybe it's just a social thing, and we sit down with people and they have a coffee, we have a coffee. It's part of our social interaction. And we enjoy the fellowship. We enjoy the coffee. Maybe we, add something to the coffee, maybe sugar, maybe milk, maybe cream, maybe some other coffee what do you call them? I'm forgetting what you call them now, but the creamers. That's what I'm looking for. So we enjoy the cup of coffee, but say in addition to the coffee, what we really would like is a boost from that cup of coffee, and that comes from caffeine. So then caffeine is the active ingredient of the cup of coffee. The caffeine is delivered to us by way of the cup of coffee, but the coffee itself is not what gives us the boost. It's the caffeine in the coffee. And in the same way, in our relationship with God, um, the our faith is the active ingredient, uh, and so there has to be faith. Now, our faith might be delivered into a situation by way of the righteous actions, and that is the primary way that we um, express our faith. As James said, faith without corresponding works, faith without works is dead. And so, and as James also explains, the work that he's thinking of is the work of love that we as Christians owe one another. Um, and so, uh, there is the love toward one another is the vehicle, like the cup of coffee is the vehicle for caffeine. So the act of love is the vehicle for our faith to be expressed. But if the cup of coffee is decaffeinated, and let's say there's no caffeine in it at all, you can drink that cup of coffee and get no boost from it. Or if you had 10 such coffees, you would still get no boost. If you had 100 such coffees, you would still get no caffeine boost, because caffeine has to be present. And so, in the same way, our acts of righteousness have to be motivated by faith, because faith is the active ingredient. Faith is the thing that produces the result that we're reading, where we're blessed, we love life and see good days. God's eyes are over us, and his ears are open to our prayers. So that's the key thought. It isn't just trying to do the right thing. It is ensuring that we're motivated by faith in doing the right thing, because that's the thing that ensures the result. Now, another thought about this is I grew up on the West Coast. I grew up in a place called Richmond, BC, which is a suburb of Vancouver. And our house that we lived in when I was a child was less than 2 miles from the ocean. So we were close to the ocean. And so obviously we saw the ocean from time to time. And one of the things we saw was tides. The tide would come in and the tide would go out. Now, there are some places in the world where tides are very dramatic, but not so where I lived. The tide, if you were to look at the ocean, and the tide is either coming in and going out all the time, but if you were to look at it, you would see no movement in or movement out at all. It would appear as if that it isn't happening at all. But if you were to look at the water and identify perhaps in the background some maybe point of land or something that doesn't move, something fixed, and then compare where the water was to that fixed point, and then look back in 15 minutes, you'd see there had been some movement. So the tide was always working one way or the other, but by looking at it, you couldn't see it. Similarly, there would be a point in which the tide would turn. That's obviously actual tides do turn. They go out and they turn and they come in. That's an expression we use in our English language. Is we talk about the tide being turned. It means the circumstance changes. And so if a person is really smart about these things, no doubt there's people who can tell us the moment in time, the exact second in time when the tide turns. But if you're looking at it, if you're looking out over the water and it's the exact moment when the tide turns, you can't tell. The water just looks exactly the same. Before the tide turned, after the tide turned, it looks exactly the same. You can't see any difference at all. But the tide, in fact, did turn in that moment. And now, if it was going out before, now it's coming in. And so, coming back to the servants now in 1 Peter 2, the moment they submit to the unrighteous master, the moment they take it patiently, what's happening to them, because that's the righteous thing. They're not being, you see, to look at it from the outside, you'd think this is a spectacle. This is a shameful, this is a horrific spectacle to observe. A man is being shamed. He's being humiliated. Here he is. He's not only being beaten, but he's taking it patiently. This is where he has been broken. This is where there's what we think what we may be seeing is a complete loss of dignity in this human being. And without faith, if the man does not have faith and he is just literally being beaten into submission, then all of that would probably be an accurate perspective. But if the man has faith and he is now submitting, not because he's being beaten into submission, but because he has faith in God, then in fact it is the opposite to what it appears on the outward. And the tide, the moment he, by faith, submits to God and therefore submits to his master, that's when the tide is turned. And now everything's going to be, and looking at it outwardly, you would see no change at all. It would be nothing has changed here. Nothing is improved. It was bad before. It's still bad right now. But in the realm of the spirit, the tide has now turned. And now what must happen because God is a covenant-keeping God, because he's a righteous judge, because he's not a man that he should lie. Now what is set in motion is the fact that this servant's life will be blessed. He will love life and see good days. The eyes of the Lord will be on him, and God's ears will be open to his prayers. That is what God has promised. So this is how the mind of God is so different than the human mind, is that he just sees something so differently than what we would naturally see. And what he's encouraging us to do is to be people of faith, people who do the right thing, people who are righteous, people who do commit ourselves to him who judges righteously. And therefore now in this place, in this time, on this earth, we love life and we see good days. We're blessed. Amen. Praise God. Thank you for being with us today.